Have you let it get you yet? People there are saying, how bad's it gonna get? And I've been calling to the sky, please don't let more bullets fly. Have you heard the talk of the cities and the towns? There's a fear from the inside and the toil all around. And I've been hoping for my help, find the cure to come and sail. In these times of
Hello, once again, critical thinkers. It is time for another edition of Critical Mass TV. I hope you'll stay with us as we explore further the consequences of participating in a society that is based entirely on greed. This is not to say that the motivations and drivers of everyone around you are strictly self-centered. The reality is quite the opposite. We have survived for eons in spite of bloodthirsty ruling class greed, not because of it. The evidence is all around us that people love each other and work tirelessly building relationships of dignity and respect. The reasons behind the cultish reverence for maximizing one's gain at the expense of others lie in a very simple equation. Money buys power, and power lets the few play God. It is Sunday, May 11th, 2014, and could there be a better day to practice some mixed mental arts for our intellectual self-defense? This one is for you, Mom. We are broadcasting live from the wonderful VCAM studios in beautiful Burlington, Vermont. I am Brad Hartley, and I would like to thank Jeremy Harple and the Aerolites for the use of the song, Have You Read the News, that we use every week. It is our weekly anthem. My thank you list also includes Jim Kelty and Arthur Hines, without whom the show just would not go on. So I recorded the Aerolites performing at Nectar's a few weeks ago, and we are going to play a full hour concert of the Aerolites in 2 weeks. It'll be in place of our regular show. The band is fantastic, and I hope you tune in to watch. So let's get down to business for tonight. I think my guests today would agree that a crucial factor in the mechanism of domination and control is the influence on public opinion and thought by the mainstream or mass media. These corporate-dominated brain mills are important to study and understand, but even with comprehension, one still is without meaningful, productive information. So remember that you don't know what you've never heard. So enter the alternative media. Please welcome Dylan Kelley and Michelle Sayles. Together, they have started a locally based radical journal called The Heretic. Hi, Dylan, and hi, Michelle.
Hello.
Thanks a lot for coming on the show with me. I really appreciate it. So, like me and working on Critical Mass TV here, you obviously never stop trying to communicate with your neighbors. Just to start us off here, what motivates you guys personally? How did you get focused on starting your own new journal?
Okay, I guess I'll start. It's been something I've been thinking about for a while. Anyone who's familiar with radical journalism probably knows the name I.F. Stone, who had Stone's Weekly for years and years, and it was just 4 pages, and it was extraordinarily popular, and even people who hated I.F. Stone really had to have his version of the news. He was a great investigative reporter. Mm-hmm. And I read a biography of his a few years ago, and that was great. And then recently, something I checked out at the Fletcher Free Library was called People's Movement, People's Press. It was essentially a history of radical journalism from the abolitionist movement through women's suffrage and civil rights, all the way through to the gay and lesbian movement. There was even an underground anti-war press in the army, and so it sort of outlined all these little movement journals all through American history, from abolition, post-Civil War, pre and post-Civil War, all the way through pretty much to the 90s. And I was thinking, like, wow, I could do that. And talked with Michelle, and yeah, we started batting around ideas. Actually, one of the more difficult things that we had to do is come up with the name of all things.
Yeah, I love the Heretic, but I know what you mean. It's tough to think about. What do we call ourselves? How do we get attention?
I know for me, I'm coming at this sort of as an artist. I started out with more of an art background, and I guess a big motivating factor for me is, what is the role of the artist? Is it to just create aesthetic beauty, or is it to talk about our times and to talk about, pertinent issues? And I've been involved in the last couple of years in the anti-fracking movement. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and that's huge right now. And just trying to get that information out in an accessible way, especially in a visual format, is so, I feel like it's a niche that I've been able to fill, but getting published is always sort of the difficult piece, especially as a political cartoonist. There's only so many syndicates, there's only so many people who can sort of get published in mainstream media. And I had been published all through college in different university papers and online alternative newsletters and that sort of a thing, but it sort of seemed like, well, why not create the body of work, make a larger paper and include the artworks that I want to have in that, and have more control over how it's distributed and where it's seen. So I guess that's
control over a lot more than just how it's distributed.
Well, yeah,
as the artist, yeah. But art as activism, I've always been really intrigued by that too. It's just one aspect of what you can do by creating art.
Absolutely.
And I think it's underserved. Just like music, and also every popular movement has its art forms, and every popular movement has its anthems, and its soundtrack. It's very cool.
And another thing that we were thinking about, this came up in the book that I mentioned earlier, People's Movement, People's Press, by Bob Ostertag, I think. So anyone out there who finds this book in the Fletcher Free Library, check it out. It's an amazing book. He talks about how movements, when regarded by historians, movements are usually the lifespan of a movement. The clock usually starts running when they begin publishing their own journalism, their own paper, their own media, when they begin really talking to one another and spreading that message onto the world. And I was like, that was one of those moments where I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go for it.
Yeah. So you want to show us? I'm sure we can get a shot on camera here of the. There we go.
That's the correct.
Yeah.
This is the Heretic, and we'll just get in on this, and I'll probably flip through a little bit. That's the logo designed by the lovely Michelle Sayles, and we had a heck of a time typesetting all of this. And if you just flip inside here, this is an article about the Farm Bill and the cuts to food stamps that Congress made, and this is a cartoon that Michelle did showing John Boehner as an elephant seal, and the Koch brothers and the Walton family and a bunch of other fun stuff in there. I personally like the guys in the background a lot. They just cracked me up, and this whole thing was just, it was a great laugh to write, and it was a great laugh to see the artwork that Michelle put together for it as well. And do you want to show anything specific?
I guess one piece that it was sort of silly when we were putting this together, but we wanted to do something in the paper to sort of develop a radical vocabulary, so that people, when we're talking about these issues, that people can relate and share in the vocabulary. And what better way to do that than a crossword puzzle?
I know, I saw that.
So that was our attempt at getting out the word.
This is our radical crossword, if we can get in on that.
So you built the crossword. You're not.
Yeah, we built it from scratch.
Nice.
And it was a blast to do. And I'm not sure if anybody's actually gone through the trouble of actually solving the thing, but it was fun, and we thought, why not? Michelle and I are the
I
bosses.
have a few scribbles in mine so far.
Good to know.
You're probably better at crossword puzzles than I am. But I think it's awesome. I think it's a great idea. So yeah, you covered some, some current issues. You have an article about GMO labeling bill. And just tell us, why don't you mention just a couple of the other, topics that you covered in this first issue.
We brought in a friend of mine who's also a journalist to do an article about education and sort of the burden of student loan debt on young people. We were highlighting local events that are going on to sort of develop the sense of community, and we also wanted to be very transparent about printing costs, just in a very upfront way. So we printed that on the back, but
Yeah.
Yeah, your little economic statement.
Yeah.
The actual economics of doing it, right? You're not going to get rich off of this, more than likely.
no.
But yeah, I'm impressed especially for your very first edition. I think it's great. So you introduced this on International Workers' Day, or May Day was when you brought the paper out. And I know I got my copy when we were all down in Montpelier at the International Workers' Day rally and march. I know you said I know I saw you taking photos, and you brought some of those photos in with you today. One thing, so there were several alternative media journalists there. There were also some local corporate media reporters and whatnot. What would you characterize their coverage of that event? So you have 1,000 people show up in Montpelier. It's all about the issues pertaining to working people. And what did we get out of our local news?
Crickets is how I would describe it.
Yeah.
It was very, very little coverage at all, given that it was a very big day. There were hundreds and hundreds of people on the lawn of the State House. A bunch of folks marched around in Montpelier. There's a whole slew of organizations. I think there's 12 different major organizations and movements who had come out. Migrant Justice, whose Spanish pronunciation I can never get. Justicia Migrante?
Justicia Migrante, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And a bunch of other organizations had really strong showings. And everyone was in a very upbeat mood following the GMO labeling thing that Shumlin just signed the other day. And a whole slew of other things. And it was just a great day. And I was kind of a funny moment of kind of trying to balance handing these out and selling these and distributing them while photographing. And it was just weird. We had a couple of funny conversations about how do we do both of these things
at the same time?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you did a good job. It was a great day, too, wasn't it? Lots of union participation.
Oh, yeah, huge.
And then just tons of individuals. I mean, 1,000 people is quite a crowd. It was just a great energy. I wish more people would participate. I mean, the rest of the world does not have an issue with really celebrating the actual impact of labor, not just our Labor Day in September, where it's more of a day to buy mattresses or a new car or something, and the whole message has sort of been lost. I mean, we don't celebrate ourselves as working people, so that was fun to actually do that. Mm-hmm. So, hey Jim, could you show the photos of that Dylan took?
Yeah, we'll walk right through, and
and
you should totally jump in if you see something that I missed or whatever. So this is a big thing in Montpelier this year. A thing that the Worker Center has been working on is a paid sick days campaign, and so the easiest way to get a good picture is to photograph a few cute kids, and that's exactly what I did to try and get in my rhythm, I guess, to try and get the juices flowing. And so these kids were showing their signs that they had made, and they were probably the most enthusiastic kids I'd seen at a political rally in quite a while.
Yeah.
I asked if I could take their picture, and they're like, yes, 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 and they all clustered together. They were pretty happy.
Yeah, it's amazing how paid sick days, just having a few of those a year is a controversial issue,
Yeah. And this was, I'm not sure exactly what this guy was doing. He was in front of the Brass Ballaghan brass band that sort of led the parade with like brass and percussion and all sorts of music. And
They just brought a ton of energy to the entire march.
Yeah, didn't they?
And what was he doing specifically, Michelle?
Looks like he's
Was he
calling
doing
in the
specifically?
bull.
Like,
He was bringing the energy with him. I
Yeah.
don't know.
he's holding pure energy in his hands right there. And it's just a cloth that he was kind of twirling around like a matador or
I
something.
think that's what he was doing, yes.
It was fun. And I believe this was someone from Bread and Puppet, though I'm not entirely, yes it was. And I think they just had a show in Chelsea, my old stomping grounds back in the day. And they were there with a variety of different things. I think energy was the big thrust of Bread and Puppet this year, and it was fun to get a picture of this person with the Capitol Theater in the background.
And this is all during the march.
Yep. This is my friend Larkin, and I can't recall the other guy's name right off the bat. They're celebrating the sort of CCTA victory, the big strike that happened here in Burlington. And
With the bus drivers,
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Yep, that's right. And they made a giant cardboard bus, and they're like sort of hauling this around during the parade route, like
I know,
celebrating
that
the
was
victory of the drivers and getting a fair contract.
Yeah, that had a lot of union participation jazzed up too. That was an
Yeah.
actual win. You know, those are few and far between.
And this was a bunch of people at the Worker Center and some student debt groups with some Put People First signs and healthcare human rights signs there in the background. And a lot of students showed up this year, a lot of new faces. There are a lot of people at May Day every day, or every year, but I hadn't quite seen this many new faces to the movement. It was fun to like see the energy that they brought and people clapping and singing all along the way. It was a good time.
Yeah, isn't that a good thing? I mean, it really is about energizing young people and having them get into the movements, and then basically, you know, it's up to them as we move through time.
Yeah. And yeah, so that was a fun picture. This picture, this is my sense of humor coming out. Just because of the giant migrant justice banner that they had.
Yeah.
And it was just a wonderful banner that they bring out. I think they had it last year too, and they brought a ton of energy. They were chanting and singing, and it was really fun to see the kind of muscular, really amped up energy that they had, and they were cheering, and they had a huge banner, and they were videotaping and doing their own media, and they had a bunch of chants in Spanish that I didn't understand necessarily, other than Si se puede, but it was a great time.
And this is the farm worker. Most of these guys are dairy farm workers.
Okay. Yep. And yep, these are the same farm workers and
Yeah.
other folks doing a lot of chanting and moving around. They're very animated and energetic, and it was just fun to photograph.
Have a very just cause, you know,
Yeah.
to get treated like a human being, no matter what you're doing and where you're from, and I really support them in their efforts.
And what else do we have here? This is you would be a bit. I believe that's just no racism.
No
but-
racismo, yeah, it just
Yeah.
means no racism.
And he had that painted obviously on his back. That was the same guy you saw in the previous picture with his hand up. And it was fun to they brought a certain swagger, like a certain fun, there's a lot of moral outrage at May Day. It was fun to see kind of like a swagger and a boast, and it brought a different attitude. It was fun. I had a lot of fun.
Little expression of power, you know.
Yeah. This was one of my favorite pictures of the day. These two women leading, I think they were leading a chant and celebrating and dancing. And if you look in the background just a little bit, the girl in the pink is clearly just having her mind blown by these two awesome women participating in this anti-capitalist march. And it was a lot of fun. And those little moments that one person observing the world of another and kind of soaking those things in. And it was handy that she was wearing a bright pink shirt too, so I was able to really draw attention to her. It's fun, a lot of fun.
Again, there was a lot of young people there of all ages. It's great to see.
And here we are, yeah.
All right, and there are your photos. So to
Did you
lead
have
us into
Observations?
to lead us into a little bit more subject matter as far as generally what the media encompasses and the importance of media and how all of us get our information day to day. Storytelling between people has kind of faded, and we get all of our information, basically, most of us do, from corporate media outlets. Not necessarily the people at this table, but the vast majority of Americans. Hey, Jim, I have that first video on media conglomeration. Could you show that for us, please? And then we'll come back and discuss it.
Journalists' claim to special status in a democratic society has always been premised on the idea that journalists help citizens become real citizens. They do that not only just by providing information, but by providing information that holds the powerful accountable. The question is, does contemporary journalism, especially within the corporate commercial media, those institutions such as the television, cable news networks, and the major newspapers, those institutions that provide the vast majority of information to the vast majority of people in the United States, do those institutions routinely provide not only information, but information that holds concentrated power accountable? A lot of those of us who are critical of the way that contemporary corporate commercial news media operate would argue that journalists within those institutions don't do that enough and don't do it at the most fundamental level. So while journalists will cover the most egregious abuses of power within a system, they rarely write about the nature of that system itself. And that's where I believe journalists have an obligation, not just to cover the corrupt politician or the corrupt business person, but to cover the nature of the political and economic systems we live in and how they concentrate power and undermine real democracy in a more fundamental way. People often look back to U.S. news media coverage of the Vietnam War and I think make the mistake of assuming that it was that media coverage that led people to be critical of the Vietnam War. I think it's almost exactly the opposite. It was the political organizing of anti-war activists that eventually forced the media to report more critically. So while I think journalists have an important role in providing that critical and independent analysis, information, and opinion that citizens need to become real citizens, I think that it's political movements that have a much more important role. Because I think journalists not only cover the world, they cover the world that is made relevant, and political movements make parts of the world relevant. So I think part of the reason there's not more vigorous coverage of the Iraq War is because there's not a more vigorous anti-war movement operating in the United States that would create pressure on the news media to give more attention to those issues.
So the the ball beginning to roll lies with the citizens ultimately.
Again,
the interest has to be there.
Yeah. Like most questions when you're trying to establish the relationship between an institution's activities and how people come to understand the world, it's not simple or unidirectional. That what citizens demand of media affect what media provide, but what media provide also affect then what citizens know to think about. And these two factors interact. In a corporate commercial system where the bottom line is always about maximizing profit, there will be an institutional pressure to provide that information that's cheapest and least controversial, which is the problem of having a media system as we do in the United States that's overwhelmingly dominated by corporate commercial news outlets. What we need, I think, is a more diversified system with more institutions that are not rooted purely in a profit motive, but other ways of organizing. Well, certainly people, if we use the term news to mean anything that people are interested in, I think we're now out of the realm of journalism, and we're just talking about what people find intriguing. And people find all sorts of things intriguing. The role of the news media, the special status of journalism, isn't simply about providing information. You know, all sorts of institutions provide information. The special status of journalism hinges on their ability to systematically, relentlessly, from a position of independence, hold concentrations of power accountable. That's the core of journalism. That's the core of a news media system in a democracy. The media more generally will seek, in a corporate commercial system, to maximize profit by providing any information, no matter how trivial. The core of journalism is quite different. And the question is, what's the relationship between journalism and these for-profit corporations through which journalists traditionally work? My own view is that that for-profit corporate commercial system erodes the ideals of journalism and steadily degrades the quality of journalism available in the culture. I think the changes in the news business, the failure of the traditional business model of advertising-supported news media, is both very challenging and threatening, because what little public affairs journalism we have is now eroding. But it also creates new opportunities for different models of how to organize journalism, and it creates a space for a lot of innovation. So I'm not necessarily overly optimistic about where that will lead, but I have seen journalists, especially younger journalists, start to reimagine what it means to be a journalist, look for other models for funding their work, and doing it successfully. I think that the limiting nature of corporate commercial journalism has led a lot of people to look for other sources of information. And some of those people will actually fund other sources of information. So the combination of philanthropic giving to journalists, that is, large foundations and wealthy individuals, the combination of philanthropic funding, some limited government funding perhaps, and a broader citizen funding of journalism, I think can produce at least the possibility of new models where journalists can remain more critical, engaged, and independent in a way that corporate commercial news media have not been able to maintain. That's the positive spin. The negative spin is it's all going to collapse and we're going to be living under fascism within the next 12 months, and there will be concentration camps in which any dissidents are killed, and that global warming will destroy what little stability there is to the ecosystem. We'll run out of oil and we'll all be reduced to barbaric activity, killing. I don't know. I think we're headed for cannibalism.
Let's end on that then. Thanks a
That
lot.
was a joke.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Thanks a lot for your time.
I thought you would like the end of that, Dylan. I knew you would appreciate that. Boy,
So he's an optimist.
He is an optimist. I know. It's funny how an academic tells a joke. Sometimes you can't really even tell if he's joking.
It's as dry as the Sahara Desert. Holy cow.
But it definitely made some really interesting points. So I think all of us would agree that between ecological factors like climate change, basically out of control, unfettered corporations that are larger than they've ever been, money dominated and corrupt political system, industrial war, perpetual war for profit. I mean, we can go on and on about like a convergence of issues that are chasing us right now as human beings and the entire globe. If corporations, as he's talking about, are dominating the major sectors where we get our information from, where does that lead us? And of course, he was talking about the challenges of alternative media and getting out there and digital technology. It's not surprising that media and our information system is so controlled, but it's just a little daunting, isn't it? I mean, I'm an alternative media junkie. I watch a lot of stuff and read a lot of magazines and always have. But you know, what are your thoughts on you know, just the media conglomeration and the kind of corporate control?
Did you want to start first, or should I?
Well, I didn't, maybe this is jumping off too soon, but looking at what's happened with, you know, Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras starting The Intercept, or, you know, I forget what the larger name of their
First Look Media.
First Look Media starting that, and, you know, breaking down all of the leaks that came out through Edward Snowden, and just, you know, providing a venue for information that otherwise would not get on to the news at all. You know, that was funded by, what was it, the eBay?
eBay founder Pierre Amidiar.
Yeah, so
Right.
it at least provides a sense of hope that there is, you know, philanthropic giving, and that, you know, just because something is corporate funded or is coming from, you know, somebody with money does not mean that they don't also value, you know, journalistic freedom, which isn't to say that, you know, all corporations are like that and are interested in, you know, letting the truth be out there. But at least with that example, there is some hope.
Yeah, there's a, you know, if they are, you know, in some aspects the model where it's profit driven, and so there's one tendency to actually cover issues that people are interested in, and like the resistance to fossil fuel infrastructure, especially amongst young people and activists, is really becoming a focal point of activism around the entire world. What the hydrofracking, of course, and the natural
our
gas
cover story.
issues, yeah. And all the tar sands, oil, and the sheer fact that we cannot keep burning all of this fossil fuel, or we're going to plunge off the cliff. But so there's a lot of people that are aware that even the profit-driven models are going to want to start to tend towards some of these issues, because it'll sell their media. You know, it's kind of an irony. But what do they say? I think it's five major U.S. corporations now control all of the electronic media, you know, the radio and television, broadcast news, and also the print media. I mean, it's down to 5 companies that are filtering pretty much everything we hear.
Yeah, it's like this. It's this really profound contraction of the sort of media ecosystem that exists out there. And there's one thing that he mentioned was like, back in the day, then in Vietnam, it was the political organizations that got the ball rolling first, and then the media had to pay attention. And that's a half-truth, and a little bit, he's absolutely right, but there was also movement media that was existing not necessarily before or after the protest organizations and the people's movements that were existing at the time. They were existing in parallel with them. And there are some really amazing like radical publications and movement-based publications that broke major stories 2-3 years before the mainstream media caught up. And throughout the entire war, throughout the 60s, all the way through to the present day, mainstream media is constantly trying to catch up. And so I think that's a little bit of it. And another big thing is the huge advancing of media conglomeration. Right now, everyone's probably familiar with net neutrality. And the fight that's going on for net neutrality right now, Comcast is really waging that fight. And Comcast is also about to merge with Time Warner. And so like Comcast has been found guilty in the past of absolutely destroying net neutrality in certain specific markets with certain specific websites and traffic patterns and things along those lines. And so as those things are happening, not only that kind of media conglomeration didn't exist back in the 60s.
Right.
And so
there were hundreds of media outlets.
There were hundreds of media. And even then, at the time, people were thinking, we're down to hundreds. How many cities? How many communities? How many different little pockets of ideas and expressions and inspirations and movements and passions exist out there? And how we're all of a sudden down to just a few hundred. How many counties are there in the United States?
Right.
We're down to just a few hundred companies. And now it's down, you can count them on one hand, it's down to 5. And 2 of them are about to merge.
Right.
And so that's another big thing of like, how do we discuss all these really complicated issues like fossil fuels, like peak energy, like GMO labeling. And really all the main issues that seem to evolve around each other are like the 3 E's. There's ecology, energy, and economy. A really important story, and increasingly more stories tend to have all 3 of those at stake. And it's, as your show obviously attests to, it's reaching a critical mass. And so I think the place for movement-based media like what you were talking about with The Intercept, Michelle, is to have an adversarial stance, not just to necessarily cover power, not necessarily to cover for power, but to cover power, and sort of reject the old stenography model of journalism where like you're just telling people what this person said, what this person said, what this person said, cut to commercial. You're providing context. What does this mean for communities? And I think that's what we're trying to do with The Heretic, and I think that should be the goal of all journalists, not just movement journalists or people who would proclaim themselves as we do to be radical journalists, but all journalists should seek and strive to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable.
Yeah, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with having an editorial viewpoint and a basic stance that your journal or your outlet is coming from. I mean, most corporate media is really actually highly conservative. They're very conservative corporations. There's a propaganda line that they're all liberal and out to get everybody, but they have an actually, as far as economic issues, environmental issues, they're actually very conservative. So for an alternative media to have, like you said, an adversarial relationship with the seats of power and the people that are involved in power, there is absolutely no shame in that. It's what needs to happen. Or you're just talking about individual, single issues and whatnot.
Exactly, and I think that good journalism doesn't try to hide the fact that it has an opinion. Not to conflate the two with like the sort of Rush Limbaugh, yes, I'm talking to you,
Right.
sort of style of radio blowhards, the Limbaughs and the Glenn Becks and others, but actually saying, this is wrong. The torture of prisoners in Guantanamo is wrong. These drone strikes are wrong. The F-35 coming to Winooski and South Burlington
Is
flying
wrong.
over my house, that is wrong. That shouldn't happen. We shouldn't be sinking all this money into yet another thing that's going to kill people. No matter how loud or quiet it is, it's another instrument of war that we don't want in our communities.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing how that can get reduced to two issues, jobs and noise. And people are completely forgetting that it's a multi-billion-dollar death machine that is designed to basically explode people in their communities. I mean, what else is it for? Besides threat and intimidation and, other, issues like that. But I know, it's about being honest and having integrity and searching for the most honorable and the most honest representation of an issue. They're always going to be interesting.
And maybe you'd be better able to talk about this than I. Sometimes the best way to do that isn't through writing. As a photographer, I know that, but like, you want to describe your process of like communicating, like particularly the shark cartoon.
The Woody Allen cartoon? Yeah. Oh.
This is epic.
Tell us.
It's somewhat epic. Well, it was a piece that I did a long time ago, and it was actually early on in Obama's administration, or first term. And I admittedly a lover of Woody Allen films, particularly Annie Hall. And there was a quote in the movie that sparked a metaphor for me that I really liked. And what did he say? They said a relationship is like a shark. It has to keep moving forward or else it dies. So, and I think I actually made this as a card for my father for a birthday present or something. But I took an image of Annie Hall standing next to Obama, holding hands, and public opinion being the dying shark on the sidewalk and the White House in the background. Nice. But I don't know, but sometimes those metaphors and those images that really simplify an issue just come from something as simple as, a silly pop culture movie, which I'm supposed to link this back into what we were talking
That
about.
is a great line, though, man.
Yeah. And I think you do that very successfully, like in the cartoons that you have here. And I guess to just kind of hinge on the F-35, because I always love your work.
Yeah, hold
And,
that up for a second.
if we can
we'll be
get
able to see it.
a good shot of, this is Michelle's work that I adore. Here we go, Arthur. Oops, there we go. If you can zoom right in, Michelle, you can probably read the copy on that, I guess.
Says, City of Winooski. On this site once stood downtown Winooski, a formerly affordable and vibrant neighborhood which was rendered uninhabitable by the basing of the F-35 fighter jet in 2014. commonly known as the plane that bankrupted America, Vermont Division for Historic Preservation. This is actually a piece I created in conjunction with somebody working on the F-35, anti-F-35 campaign.
Yeah, it's not just the F-35, but moving away from industrial slaughter
Yeah.
in all forms is absolutely one of the critical things we all pivot on. We definitely can no longer afford it, and it's there to serve the same power interests that the media is there to serve. I don't really feel like it's protecting me as an individual very much.
Yeah, and another thing that I was just remembering about the optimistic gentleman that we saw there on the video is he was talking about funding, and I just wanted to point out our journal here. So $2 suggested donation, and we actually put our budget right there on the back of the thing, so it's absolutely transparent. And that's just one way of doing things. And I think a lot of journalists and media scholars out there are really desperate to find the magic bullet, to find the cure for cancer, to find the thing that will save journalism. And when they say that, they usually are conflating journalism with newspapers, specifically newspapers. The newspapers do a lot of great reporting, but they're not the end-all, be-all of reporting. And so there's this constant talk of well, maybe community subsidies, maybe government-funded journalism, maybe this, maybe that. And I guess I just want to take this opportunity to say that there's no one thing out there that's going to solve everything. It's going to be a sprawling ecosystem of different solutions that overlap or clash, some that work, some that don't work. And we're still at the very early phases of this. We feel like we're at a mature media age, going back to the time of Gutenberg in the 1450s with the printing press.
Printing press, yeah.
But now we've just dipped our toe into Web 2.0 and the blogosphere and Twitterverse and everything that's user-generated content, and this vast sort of synergy of media that we're only really just beginning to wade into as journalists. And so a lot of journalists are saying how do we resurrect journalism? I'm not worried about how do we resurrect journalism. Journalism has been walking along just fine. I'm wondering what happens when we start running. Right.
Yeah, one thing I notice about historical models of media compared to like you're talking about, the blogosphere and the digital media, is a newspaper or a television network or whatever is it's kind of a coalesced, easy to feed information stream. There isn't, at least for somebody old like myself, there's no clearinghouse, because we're used to sort of being fed our news. So it is a little bit challenging to hunt around on it, online and find, good responsible sources of media. Of course, there's lots of them out there. But I know if I struggle a little bit when I'm actually desperately looking, then I know it's challenging for people, of my generation and older. They're still primarily getting everything from, the major networks or the Times or, Burlington Free Press or whatever, which are, very limited content, to say the least.
Yeah.
So I hope it evolves in a good direction.
I was just going to say, it seems also that a big, an issue that confounds or confuses people, I think, is giving equal access to the media to very differing supported arguments. Like looking at climate change, we've got such an abundance of information against it, funded essentially by PR firms that are trying to, spread a corporate agenda, essentially. And getting that information out there and trying to argue the point that this is not a majority opinion is so difficult to achieve when there's so much money backing that particular, understanding of the world, especially, and then looking back and seeing that a lot of these companies are the same companies that were framing, tobacco in the 1950s as something that was actually healthy for you, and there's all those interconnections as well, that where the funding is coming from. If it's a PR firm that's sparking a lot of new news coverage as opposed to a people's movement, that may or may not happen. That might happen a lot more often than we would like to think.
Yeah, no question about it.
That kind of segues pretty well into one of the other things that
Yes.
planning on showing.
So, hey, Jim, could you show that second video for us? The one with RT.
Now, this is the part of the show that we're going to do once a week where we get a chance to respond and to reflect on some of the criticism of RT from the mainstream press. They, of course, didn't call us to ask us to respond, so we want to respond to you, to our viewers, to whoever is watching. Maybe you saw this segment last week, and there was such an outpouring of opinion to it on the internet that I wanted to share some YouTube comments with you. Here is one. It says RT tells more about the truth about America than CNN, Fox, ABC, CBS, MSNBC, and all of the newspapers combined. That in itself makes RT a saint, well, thank you, compared to the trash fed to Americans and the rest of the world. That's why the attack dogs are out in force to try to discredit RT. I'm very pleased with the truth RT uncovers, or at least asks the questions no one else in the media is asking. That was Purell, one of our viewers. Another says, I worked for CBS, NBC, ABC, and PBS in a 26-year career in news and network programming, from journalist to news producer. I was fired for trying to expose the lies within the military-industrial media complex about Iraq and other endless cover-ups. RT is not perfect, but they're far more truthful than the traitors, liars, and media whores that I experienced firsthand. That was from Affinity Net News. And here's another that says RT and the Onion Network go hand in hand, kind of like watching Jon Stewart for your news. That was from Hobo59. And Hobo59, that actually, thank you, you bring me to the criticism that we want to address today. In an interview on NPR with a guest from globalmediawars.com, that guest was asked to describe RT's coverage, to say what his assessment of it would be. This was his analysis. It is entertainment news, and the gist of that entertainment is making fun of the United States. Their content doesn't try to take itself that seriously. Now, in that same interview, the interviewer from NPR, in talking about RT's coverage of Osama bin Laden's death, said, laughing, well, hey, maybe they were just thinking the whole thing would blow over. And also, the Global Media Wars guest said in its report on RT that RT's high production values cannot hide its lack of substantive journalism. So we want to take a look. You know, I wanted to go back and look at mainstream media coverage versus what RT was covering in similar times. And to do this, I checked some pollsters' research out. Pew Research tracks the top mainstream media stories week by week, so you can see a breakdown of the top 5 stories that they cover in that given time. And looking back, I did see that, yeah, there is a really, really great example where we totally missed one of the 5 biggest stories of the week that was covered by the mainstream media. Take a look.
But let us begin with Charlie Sheen.
We don't have to tell you, for the past week, it has been wall-to-wall Charlie Sheen on TV.
It's 5:30 a.m. Charlie Sheen climbs the stairs of his Hollywood Hills mansion.
A lot of people, Brooke, say he's taking his media blitz to the next level.
Sheen provided Dateline with his own never-before-seen version of his reality.
Tonight, Charlie Sheen. He's been everywhere for the last 3 days.
And at the end of our shooting, we wondered, as you no doubt will, what did we just witness?
That's what we wondered. What did we just witness? We totally missed it here at RT. We didn't cover Charlie Sheen at all. But to compare, I looked back at what our top stories were, some of them, in that week. Take a look.
America's middle class fighting a war already dubbed historic.
This is what democracy looks like.
This is especially true in Southern California, where paid FBI informants have fractured the cohesiveness of a law-abiding community.
I'm fearful of retaliation by the FBI.
Uncertainty over production has sent prices soaring, meaning the shockwaves from the Middle East turmoil are being felt worldwide.
The U.S. Sixth Fleet has been repositioning its ships in the Mediterranean. U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton stated, quote, nothing is off the table. And as we just saw, British Prime Minister David Cameron has echoed those sentiments.
As violence continues in Libya, the U.S. sends warships and more troops in that direction, fueling speculation of a military intervention.
As politicians, both state and federal, continue to ignore the calls of the people, their voices are only getting louder.
Labor protests, Libya, Middle East oil, Charlie Sheen. You decide which is more entertaining or more of entertainment news or more serious journalism. But I wanted, to be fair, that was a big week for Charlie Sheen. Very big week. He lost it. So maybe it would just be better to look at one day where another big story broke that we missed. And on this day, we missed covering one of the biggest newsmakers of the week. He was number 3, according to Pew Research that week.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
The governor.
California woke up today to a bombshell.
Schwarzenegger admitting he had a child with a staff member who worked for the family for 20 years.
We now learn Maria demanded he move out after the revelation.
It was a bombshell for everybody except for RT. What were we covering on that very day? Let's look. In Afghanistan today, at least 11 people were killed and 80 injured when violent protests broke out after a NATO raid that allegedly killed 4 civilians. G20 finance ministers are meeting in Argentina to address commodity prices. They're concerned about volatility. Now, you may recall food prices have broken 2008 records.
I think they have to be covered. And, you know, of course, Tim died in Misrata, Libya, and was the story he was covering that day worth his life? No, obviously not.
The U.S. dollar is something that is the subject of a World Bank report that's just come out saying that it does not expect dollar hegemony in 2025. First of all, sorry you have to endure so much of me. I just happened to be anchoring that day that the big news broke with Arnold. But Arnold, commodity prices, war, which impacts more people? I mean, whose newsworthiness is more entertainment-based? You decide. And let's just look, too, at what is one of the biggest stories this very day on the cable networks. Let's look.
All right, we've got new developments in the Casey Anthony murder trial.
The Casey Anthony murder trial now is in its 7th day.
Casey Anthony's mother, Cindy, breaks down on the stand.
I forget. Casey Anthony all over, breaking down every single little tidbit of one murder trial that affects one family that is now expected to rival O.J. Simpson levels of media coverage. 600 press have reportedly been credentialed for one criminal case. Today, we're talking about the economy, the debt ceiling, unemployment, 1 million people trying to get jobs at McDonald's. You can decide. We just gave you 3 examples of some of the different choices in coverage. You can decide what you think is more entertaining, more substantive journalism, and I'm going to have to leave you on that note, because that.
Yes, so there we're comparing and contrasting a little bit. RT News, which is the Russia Today, rebranded Russia Today network. But it was interesting to see the difference between like the shock and titillation kind of stories in the U.S. media, and then there's definitely more substantive stories that RT was covering. Have you guys have you ever watched RT at all?
I mean, I've not. Is it on television or is it based?
Yeah, it's carried in a lot of markets in the U.S. Yeah.
Being without cable,
right, satellite cable, yeah. So it's similar. It's obviously based in Russia and financed by the Russian government, I do believe. Similar to Al Jazeera, which emanates from Qatar, in the Middle East. But as long as they're not reflecting on domestic Russian issues, I'm sure like the Ukraine coverage would be very different than what we would expect. But the way they cover the rest of the world is actually quite good and objective.
And it's interesting that you mentioned Russia and Ukraine. And RT, for the most part, toes the Russian line. It's sort of like in regard to Russian foreign policy and Russian domestic policy and how that all affects the world stage. For the most part, RT is like Vladimir Putin's arm, with a few exceptions, coming right down to the individual reporters. Abby Martin being one of the great examples of someone who is going to go out there, going to continue to pursue journalism and do really substantive work and do really impactful work. And when she's called out by her superiors at RT for not towing the sort of Russian line, she calls them out on the air, on her own show, on RT. So it's like one of those things where like, overall, the network as a system is exactly as you've described, mostly great journalism except in regard to Russia, but then there are actually individual reporters who are willing to get there and take a stand and say, no, I'm not going to just do what you tell me to do. And she actually took a lot of criticism internally for that, and she spoke out about that as well. So I think as a system, it's great, but it has its flaws. The individual journalists, I challenge anybody to go toe-to-toe against Abby Martin and say, you're not doing your job as a journalist.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of domestic corporate media outlets, you would be fired for that kind of insubordination, especially on
Instantly.
Instantly. Yeah. Let me introduce Edward Bernays. People should definitely look up Edward Bernays, Bernays. He is the father of modern public relations. Bernays' public relations efforts helped to popularize Sigmund Freud's theories in the United States. Bernays also pioneered the PR, or public relations industry's use of psychology and other social sciences to design its public persuasion campaigns. And this is a quote: "If we understand the mechanism and motives of the group mind, is it not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without their knowing about it? The recent practice of propaganda has proved that it is possible, at least up to a certain point and within certain limits." So he was talking about his entry into the public relations industry that he invented, and what his first success was convincing the American people to support entry into World War I. But he called his scientific technique that he developed, the opinion molding, was called the engineering of consent. So, you know, it really, the modern manipulation techniques it's basically kind of a thought control mechanism that we're subjected to with corporate media. And Edward Bernays was certainly the father of that, who was also the nephew of Sigmund Freud. So we don't have much time to cover more of Edward today, but we definitely will in a future show. And yes is the answer to that, sir.
Should I go right away?
Yeah, go for it.
So before we close, I was trying to be stealthy and like writing a note
That's
or whatever.
Okay.
Like,
I
didn't want to interrupt you as you were reading. I just wanted to share that I soon will be getting a show on the Radiator 105.9 to talk about a lot of these same issues with a lot of community members in Burlington. So it's going to be a hyper-local show about alternative politics and perspectives and ideas and issues that are facing the community of Burlington. And also Vermont in general. And so it's going to be on 105.9, The Radiator. Coming up, I get trained this week. So I'm really excited, and it'd be great to have you on the show, and we can
certainly
talk further
I'd love
about
to do that. Yeah,
all sorts of things.
So
I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah.
Shameless
So
plug.
you're having a show. We're plugging your show, and so you're saying you get trained. Tell me again what. So you will have how long of a time slot, or?
It's going to be an hour long, same as the show, and essentially it's going to be rather similar to the show. It's going to be kind of like a Terry Gross style interview, sit-down interview with different change makers throughout the community, maybe with like a musical break or two thrown in to break it up a little bit, but kind of a Terry Gross style show about alternative, radical ideas, issues, struggles, and things along those lines.
Nice, good, Dylan. That's awesome.
So it's fun to share that.
So where is the 105.9 Studios? Is that in Burlington?
It is. I believe it's on College Street and North Winooski or South Winooski.
Right. So it's right downtown.
Yeah, it's right above Pier Pop.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think I have seen the sign. Wow, that's excellent. I'm glad you're doing that, and I did not know about that. So very cool. Well, thank you folks for coming on. I like the Heretic. I think you're off to a great start, and I can't wait for my next edition.
Yeah.
This time I won't. This time I won't just pay you for half of it.
Well,
so you know what? Hang on. I promised I would.
$1.
I do, man. There you go. Now I have fully contributed. Okay. Awesome. I told you I would. I didn't know I would do it on live TV, but now we have it documented. We'll never forget.
Yeah. And if anyone out there wants a copy of The Heretic, just send $2 cash or check to 36 LeClaire Street, Winooski, Vermont, 05404, along with your name and address, and we'll try and get it to you. Any last thoughts before we go? We have 20 seconds.
That's it.
All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in to Critical Mass TV. Next week, like I said, we're going to see a concert by Jeremy Harpel and the Aerolites. So good night, everybody. Have a great one.